Hello everyone, it is time for my wrap-up of the month of May of 2022, and as some of you know, if you saw my previous TBR, I decided to do all standalones in May. It shall be the month of standalones, partially because I wanted to do a top standalones list later this year instead of a top series list, and so I only read standalones in the month of May. Okay, every book I started in May was a standalone. Okay, every book I both started and finished in May was a standalone. That's close enough for me. So, normally now for my wrap-ups, I like to go from least favorite to favorite, but because I was trying to do all standalones, I'm going to first get the non-standalone out of the way. There were no rereads in May, which I'm not super happy about, but it was all standalones, and I don't know which one I would have reread. I guess, I don't know, whatever. But I'm going to mention the non-standalone first, which was The Hunger of the Gods, the new release by John Gwynne. I have a somewhat long Goodreads review for it, and I'm going to kind of repeat it here. Basically, I like this slightly more than Shadow of the Gods. I see other people seem to like it slightly less, which I do get, because I think it's not paced quite as well. It's not quite as tight, which is a large appeal to John Gwynne's book. It's still paced pretty well, but usually John Gwynne is very snappy with the pacing. I did like it slightly more than Shadow of the Gods, and still less than Faithful and the Fallen. Basically, the reason I liked it more than Shadow of the Gods is it introduced a little bit more scheming. It had more of the various forces trying to manipulate each other, while I felt like Shadow of the Gods, almost all the conflict was just this person wants to stab this person, and this person doesn't want to be stabbed. And I really appreciated the more like manipulations and scheming that we got, because we got the new point of view, and John Gwynne has been doing villain point of views his entire career, and he is very good at it. He has a character that people are saying is kind of Glockta-esque, and he's Glockta-esque in that he has an internal monologue that doesn't match with what he says out loud. The difference is he's very different in terms of like the tones of both. Glockta actually tends to be very like loud and like full of like, he'll tend to express rage like out loud. Like if he's he'll scream at someone if they mess up. Well, Glockta's internal monologue is generally more like dry or clever or sarcastic. While Guthvar, who's kind of the Glockta-esque character here, tends to be very polite to people and is just like angry in his head. I would say I prefer Glockta, but I still prefer this new POV. I still like Faithful and the Fallen more for basically the same reason, in that I felt it had more scheming. Both kind of have like some kind of power battling against each other, but I felt like Faithful and the Fallen, it was more like they were playing a chess game using the characters as pieces, and this it's more straight up war. I will say though, one reason I think a lot of people do like Bloodsworn more is the writing is better and the world building is better, and they're not like a little bit better, they're a lot better. John Gwynne, like as a line by line writer, has improved a lot. His prose style is very different in the Bloodsworn, and it also focuses more on the world building. I think the appeal of the world building in Faithful and the Fallen was almost that, how like efficient it was, how much it didn't spend time. So it didn't have any info dumps, it was kind of familiar, and it still had some cool stuff like giants and some of the ways the prophecies were put in there and some fantasy creatures. Anyways, this was supposed to be about standalones, and I haven't talked about any standalones. So the rest of this is all standalones, and I had a really productive month. I read 9 standalone books, and I finished The Hunger of the Gods. So I finished 10 books in the month of May. A lot of them were short, but some of them were longer. Like American Gods was in there, and that's pretty long. Hunger of the Gods is pretty long. But it was mostly shorter books, which is why I was able to read 10. Editing me, I'll put the amount of pages I read here, but I don't remember what it is, so I'm not going to do it now. And only one of the books got less than 4 stars. It was 1 3-star, a crap ton of 4 stars, which some of which were in the 7 ranges, some of which were in the 8 ranges, but most of which were 8 point something. It was month of standalones was really successful. I actually think in terms of average quality, it was better than most of the months where I was doing series. So, maybe there's something to be said for standalones. And then there was 2 that got at least 9 out of 10 on Goodreads, which gets you 5 stars because math, because 4.5 rounds up. So, my least favorite standalone is from an author I read 2 books from, and you're going to see much later in this video. But bringing in the bottom is Ysabel by Guy Gavriel Kay. Yes, I know, shocking. I have a Guy Gavriel Kay book at the bottom of this list. Is it horrible? Well, no, it was fine. I would almost... This is my least favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book. It's more contemporary. And Guy Gavriel Kay writing like a contemporary character who has who refers to his shoes as Nikes. And, calls it thinks offense is lame. Like, the writing is a lot more modern because it's a more modern setting. And basically, as I said, in my Goodreads review, this is a book that has a perfectly good multi-thousand-year-long grudge match between 2 people who keep resurrecting and who try and kill each other, who just don't really care that much about collateral damage. And it also has a kid on a trip with his dad who's doing some photography because he's a professional photographer. And one of those storylines was obviously a lot cooler than the other. And I really liked the stuff we got for the grudge match. But the kid, Ned, and his photography trip and, just being on a trip in France was the less interesting stuff. And I think, you could definitely... It's obviously deliberate, because it's different from his others. But... And I think it might just be, that character's voice, Ned, the way Ned sees things, but a random, tick of the writing of the way GGK wrote the modern character, where he thinks of things by brand, he thinks of his shoes as Nikes, his camera as his Canon, because it's the brand. Was just a choice I found annoying. I don't know. Maybe this is partially because I've read so many of the author's books that prose-wise is a completely different style that it feels jarring. Maybe I would have enjoyed this more if I wasn't familiar with his works. But I don't know. I actually liked the second half a good bit, but it took a while to get into because it was just okay, photography chip, whatever. Some of the supporting cast was pretty good. This is also literally a YA book, and I'm not meaning that the writing's not as good, so I'm saying it's YA, because that's not a smart thing to do. When I say this is literally a YA book, I mean the primary themes of this book is you have someone in their mid to late mid-teens who's starting to deal with the transition of becoming more into an adult, and this responsibility, and seeing the world as an adult, and how being seen as an adult himself affects how he lives his life. So it's very much what you would expect. It's the themes that almost make something, by definition, young adult. So it definitely is what it's more about, while most of the author's protagonists tend to be more like adults. But yeah, I gave it 6 point something. 6.8, so didn't hate it or anything. It was fine. It had some really good writing. But I would honestly only recommend this to people who really like Guy Gavriel Kay or who really like contemporary fiction. And also don't read it before Fiona Var. You can just not read Fiona Var and Ysabel at all, to be honest, if you're not a pretty big fan of Guy Gavriel Kay. But I like Fiona Var quite a bit. And this is, I still enjoyed it, but obviously it's first of the standalones I'm mentioning, so don't love it. Anyways, moving on, we have my first foray into an author, and that was with American Gods by Neil Gaiman. And this is the thick edition. This is the big boy that, has a lot of stuff after the end of the book, to be honest. It's got book club questions and interview questions, so it's not actually this long. And this pretty big jump up from Ysabel. I forgot to mention I gave Hunger of the Gods 7.7. Which would be... I think I like this more than Hunger of the Gods. This was my first Neil Gaiman book. I gotta say, the introduction to this book might be the best introduction to any book ever in the history of humanity. Like, this is what it says at the end. Furthermore, it goes without saying that all of the people, living, dead, and otherwise, in this story are fictional, or used in a fictional context. Only the gods are real. Like, how good is that? And then he has a thing where he talks about the edition, where this is the longer edition, where he says he thinks of a novel as a long piece of prose that has something wrong with it. And he's like, yeah, that's what he calls it. That's what the best definition of a novel: a long piece of prose that has something wrong with it, which I really liked. And then I really liked the prologue. I actually would recommend not reading the back of this book. This was one of the books where I'm glad I went in blind, because I really enjoyed the prologue and kind of seeing how things went wrong. And I think the back of the book says, like, what's the thing that went wrong? And I think if I knew that, I would have definitely enjoyed it less. And then it goes to chapter 1, which is bizarre. Truly, truly bizarre. This is a really weird book. And, you know, sometimes when people say weird, they mean horny, and sometimes they mean weird. And in this case, I absolutely mean both. Yeah, and I mean, he literally says in the introduction that it's a bizarre and meandering book. And yeah, it's a bizarre and meandering book. I think I didn't hate the protagonist, but a lot of people find the protagonist boring. I found he was okay, but not enough to, like, really love a 700-page book about him that is, you know, deliberately extremely meandering. But I really like Neil Gaiman's writing. I'm definitely going to read more Neil Gaiman. This definitely might not be my favorite story, but I actually thought his prose was very effective. Actually, a lot about Neil Gaiman almost kind of reminded me of Guy Gavriel Kay. I just didn't like it as much. But having the very good writing, sometimes being weirdly horny, incorporating, like, mythology into a setting that's based on the modern world but clearly different. They do it in a different way. Guy's more historical and changes the names, and while Gaiman is doing, like, the hint, this is actually how things work. Where I think a lot of, like, you know, I think even as adults, you know, when kids growing up are like, you know, maybe I'll get the letter from Hogwarts. And, you know, this can be the adult version of that. Maybe that guy who conned me is Odin. Who knows? Adults can enjoy that kind of stuff too. Anyway, so I gave that 7.9 out of 10. Enjoyed it quite a bit. Thought it was a really good book. Didn't absolutely love it. Not an all-time favorite. Whatever. Man, the writing was really good, though. I was impressed with that. It had some really clever stuff coming down the stretch as well. Next, This Is How You Lose the Time War. Technically not a novella by two people. One of the first... I don't read that many multi-author books. And this book, I am not sure if it was mega pretentious or completely genius or both. So basically, it's about a time war. And it's a guide on how to lose it. 0 to 10. I don't know how to lose. Just kidding. It's not that. So basically, the structure of this book is interesting. I think some people are going to hate this. It follows two people who are on completely different cultures who are trying to mess with timelines to extinguish the other culture. And it's like the two top agents who kind of leave letters at first just to mess with each other, and then they kind of become friends, and it kind of goes from there. And the structure of the book is you'll get a point of view from one person's perspective doing a mission, and then they'll find a letter, and then the next section will be the letter, and then you'll get a point of view from the other person. And if you want to know the details about how this time war works, or the world building, or how this situation came to be, or how the situation got established, or the details of how these missions are actually being effective, or really any of the large-scale details of the world, then too bad, you're not getting this. This is about the relationship between two people who have never talked to each other face-to-face and mostly just leave taunting letters to each other. But I enjoyed it anyways. So, whatever. I don't need those things, I guess. It's definitely was an ambitious format of a book to do, and I think it was pulled off, but I I don't know. I feel like if I read this again, I'd either give it like, I'd decide it was just completely pointless and give it like 3 out of 10, or I'd decide it was genius and give it like 9 point. I probably wouldn't give it. I'd probably give it like the same score and say like it's both. Whatever. Writing was really good. Sometimes, I mean, a character in one of the letters literally says, "I feel my prose purpling." So some of those letters at the end kind of get like, okay, this might be a bit overwritten, but it's supposed to be an overwritten letter. So whatever. And actually, it was really clever. There was kind of a mystery in the way it was revealed was really clever. Anyways, 8.3 out of 10. Maybe. I have no idea what score to give this book. I should really just give it 4 stars and not give it a score. There's actually another book like that coming up. I don't know how to give it a score. I want to just give it 4 stars. Anyways, not this one. This one is a pretty straightforward book. You guys know this book probably. The Martian by Andy Weir. Read Project Hail Mary last year. Was fantastic. This was also fantastic. I definitely like Project Hail Mary more. There's a movie about this. I probably don't even need to say what it's about, but in case you're one of the 3 people who doesn't know, this is about a guy who gets stuck on Mars and then makes jokes while using botany and problem solving to not die. There you go. I like Project Hail Mary. I think the stuff on Mars was all really good. One thing that I think kind of lost me is the amount of character. This also like cuts to chapters and you get point of views from people who are on Earth who were like, holy crap. And I think the characters that were on Earth were not great. And I don't think they needed to be great, but there were a lot of them. And I couldn't keep track of them because they weren't very good. I don't think Andy Weir's big strength is building a like deep bullpen of really good characters. Like generally he has a really fun protagonist, but the book is about the fun protagonist, so it works. And you know, are his 2 protagonists super similar? Yeah, whatever. Has he proven he can write an interesting character that isn't Space MacGyver? I don't know. Maybe he hasn't. But you know what? I read a lot of books. I can do one Space MacGyver every couple of years. So he might, even if, who knows, maybe he can write other really good characters. But even if his thing is Space MacGyver, he writes Space MacGyver really well. So, whatever. And he has the ability, like, literally a lot of this book, like, I read it and I was really enjoying it. And then I think back and I'm like, that was literally math. Like, he's in a situation and Mark Watney is like, well, this is how many calories I need. This is how much food I have. The next time I will be able to get food is in this many days. So according to that math, I'm going to die. But how about I do this? And then according to this math, I might even die later. Or maybe if I really stretch things, I might not die. And it's just, he makes math tense and interesting. Even if you don't like math. Like, you don't have to do the math. But it's like this character doing math is compelling. Anyways, it's really impressive. And it's a super fun page-turny book, but I like Project Hail Mary more. Anyway, next up, another book that was adapted into a movie, and this one I gave The Martian 8.3 as well. I gave this 8.3, but I don't know if I want to give this a score out of 10, because I don't feel I can be that precise, because next is The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which obviously got adapted into the classic satire fantasy. And so this book is, the framing device of this book is weird, and also I'm really confused about at what date this book came out, because it references the movie, and it even references Andre the Giant as Fezzik. But the book came out before the movie. What? So, did William Goldman really predict that his book would get adapted to a movie which would be way more successful and well-known than the book, and that Andre the Giant would play Fezzik? What? Anyways, so 40 pages into this book, I was literally like, 30 pages in, I was like, is this still the author introduction? Like, I wasn't sure if I was reading the book or a really long author introduction. because the start of this book is William Goldman recounting how he himself came to write this book. And it's his dad read him The Princess Bride, and it was his favorite book, which he'd never read because his dad read it to him. And then he had a kid, and he got the kid The Princess Bride, and the kid was like, this sucks. And so he went to read The Princess Bride, and he was like, realized that his dad had abridged it heavily. And that the story he enjoyed unironically, because of the fencing, fighting, torture, poison, true love, hate, revenge, giants, hunters, bad men, good men, beautifulest ladies, stakes, spiders, beasts, chases, escapes, lies, truths, passion, and miracles, which he enjoyed unironically for the adventure, was actually like from a 1,000-page satire book that's obsessed with the history of a place called Florin, which this book is gonna pretend is a real place, and this book is also gonna pretend that the original Princess Bride is a real 1,000-page satire book that gets the history of Florin accurately. Anyway, his dad just cut that down and only read like the action parts, and it turned it into like a 220-page fantasy thriller. And so he's then abridged that book to just basically to cut it down to like just the parts that his dad read. So you'll only get that, and then you'll just get commentary. Like, he'll just write what he removed. So he'll just remove like the next 60 pages was just about people packing hats. And apparently, the scholars have told me that it showed Morgenstern's genius with his satire, showing the complete ridiculousness of this culture obsessed with hats. But it's just hats, so I skipped it. And here's a scene where here's a duel. And then, speaking of the actual Princess Bride part, is so the stuff you're reading, that's like the stuff that gets adapted with like Inigo Montoya and Wesley and Buttercup, is all pieces from a satire meant to make a story that was enjoyed unironically. It's really interesting to read. And then the last 100 pages I can't talk about, but the last 100 pages are even more like, what the hell is going on here? So if you thought the framing mechanism I described was wild for the start of this book, wait until you get to the end of this book. So anyway, I'd recommend reading this if you enjoy the movie. The dialogue, like in the actual Princess Bride parts, if you like the movie, you'll like the book, because most of the scenes in the movie are like directly adapted for the book. This and The Martian both made me go like, you know, we keep saying like for these adaptations that we have to change all these things, but like the scene by scene adaptations are all good. Hunger Games 1, basically scene by scene, successful adaptation. Game of Thrones Season 1 is not quite scene by scene, but most of these scenes in Game of Thrones Season 1 are almost directly pulled from the books. Like, the lines of dialogue are like some things are changed because some of the scenes would be illegal if the actors were younger. But a lot of the dialogue is literally scene by scene. Harry Potter, movie 1, almost a scene by scene adaptation. The Princess Bride, almost a scene by scene adaptation. The Martian, almost a scene by scene adaptation. Yeah, some scenes are removed, some things are changed. There's a plot with a dust storm that gets removed. Like, minor things are changed, but all of these are really faithful adaptations, and they were all like more successful than 95% of adaptations. So I'm starting to just be jaded with having to accept that adaptations have to change a lot, and starting to just be like, do they don't, like, obviously for some things they have to more. Like Stormlight or Malazan would be harder to adapt than The Martian. But I think less needs to be changed than we act like it does. I mean, look at Dune. Dune obviously cut some stuff out, but a lot of the scenes, again, scene by scene. Anyways, this is a tangent from a wrap-up, which is a long wrap-up, because it's all standalone, so I can actually talk about the plot of every book, so it's more like 9 mini reviews. Anyway, Oh, and it's all books I like more now, so let's see if this gets longer. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. 8.7 out of 10. I don't love contemporary stuff a lot of the time, but I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. I think at times the prose could arguably be described as purple, but it worked with what it was trying to do. The story was really compelling. It was a really good idea, like a 300-year-old who's immortal that people can't remember, that you will follow both in current day life in like 2014 and also in the past and like slowly learn how to got there. This is only my second Schwab book. The first was Vicious. Both have the dual timelines, and both times she did it really well. I think one advantage of the dual timelines is when one's time is more setup, doing more setup stuff, you can have payoff in the other. And the chapters in this are really short. So even when one of the timelines was less interesting, it'd be like 3 pages, and then you get to the more interesting stuff again. Yay. And yeah, it's not going to be for everyone. I mean, it's contemporary. It's arguably a romance. I don't enjoy that many books like this, but it was really well executed. It's not one of my favorite books ever. I think one of the struggles of the premise of this book is that it is hard to have a really strong supporting cast of characters because they forget the protagonist right away. There are some other characters who are kind of compelling, but this is really carried. One of the books where there are some books I think where you can not enjoy the protagonist and still be like, that's a really good book. Like, because they focus more on other protagonists. Like, you know, if you're reading Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay, even if you're not a huge fan of Devon, you can be like, all these people around Devon and Dianora, and all the people around Dianora are really cool, though, and really enjoy it. This one, if you don't like Addie LaRue, you're screwed, and you're not going to like the book. But I thought she was a really good protagonist. So I really enjoyed this book. Yeah. It was a really well done standalone. And next we have one. I'm so happy to have this next book in the tail end of this video. I have read 2 books by this author before. I wanted to like them so much. And I kind of did. I gave the first one like a mid 6 point something. This was before I did the YouTube videos, and then I gave the second one a mid 7. I found the first 2 I read funny, but I wasn't super compelled by the story. But this, which we read for my university book club, I really enjoyed. And it is Small Gods by Terry Pratchett. Let's go. Alan, are you watching this video? I am now probably going to read all the Discworld books. I wasn't sure if I was going to. This was fantastic. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's the most interesting story. I also really like the characters and think he's gotten better for the writing. I thought I would like, because I really like Pratchett's style of humor. The kind of dry, witty, ironic, sarcastic humor. Oh, I love it. It's like, it makes you both like smile because that's clever and chuckle at the same time. And it is about someone who's the chosen one for the great god Om. The great god Om is stuck in the form of a tortoise. So, yeah. And it's fantastic. The commentary on themes is wonderful. The story is great. And the denouement is genuinely heartfelt. I like this a lot. I thought it was really good. Still some issues with Pratchett that stopped it from being like a 9.5 or anything. Sometimes I just wish Pratchett would tag his dialogue. I know it works, but there are conversations, like groups of people are talking, like 3 or 4 people, and he just doesn't tag the dialogue. He just writes the words, and I'm not smart enough to follow this. Or at least it makes me read it either multiple times if I want to know who said what, and I want to know who said what. And it's like, yeah, it saves time reading because I don't have to read Bertha said, but I have to read it 3 times to figure out who said something. So I think sometimes, like, for clarity-wise, I'm kind of just like, whoa, what happened, and have to reread some stuff. But I also want to note, I don't think anyone has had as much fun writing his books as Terry Pratchett did. Like, it feels like he's having a blast as he writes this. It was really good. I gave it 8.8. some minor issues kept it from being like an upper 9 book, but I am now officially excited to read quite a bit of Discworld. Let's go. Next up, that is the 4 stars. That was a lot of 4 stars. We have 2 books that got 5 stars, and the first of which was the first book I read this month, which is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beale. Gorgeously written book. This is another book. There's been a lot of books this month that are kind of like hard to describe. They're very unique in terms of feel. Princess Bride, This Is How You Lose the Time Work. And this one. This was like unicorns are obviously things out of like fables, out of fairy stories. While people are real. But in this book, the unicorn feels like a relatively grounded personality. I mean, not grounded because it's a unicorn, but very much feels like it could be how someone thinks. While the people are all based on what they would be like in a fairy tale. Like, they're all like a fairy tale character, but they're all just twisted off of being the fairy tale character. There's the dude that, there's like the outlaw that's like Robin Hood, but, well, he doesn't steal from who he steals, he's kind of a coward. And he just, like, gets paid off to not steal from people. And there's a bunch of examples like this. Really, really beautiful story. This is absolutely not going to be for everyone, but I enjoyed this quite a lot. I was surprised by how fast-paced it was. I was kind of expecting it to be kind of like Piranesi, which I think in some ways it is. But Piranesi is not exactly fast. It's like Piranesi, it's similar throughout the book. I really love Piranesi, and I was fine with that. I was expecting it to be, and I was totally fine with that. This actually, like, a lot happens in this book. It's pretty fast-paced, not in terms of, like, action, but in terms of just, like, how much stuff happens. So I gave this a 9.2 out of 10. Probably could have gotten higher, but as interesting as the fairy tale stories were, I kind of prefer the more grounded take on characters, which held it back from getting an even higher score. Really, really good writing. Like, the prose is... and speaking of prose, that is, we have my favorite book of May. Remember when I said Guy Gavriel Kay would come up again? Well, here he is. Speaking of gorgeous prose, Under Heaven by Guy Gavriel Kay, which I believe this is now the 4th super, like, valid entry point to Guy Gavriel Kay. I've been saying you can start with Tigana, start with Lines. I mean, you can start with more, but if someone asks where should I start, it was kind of one of Tigana, The Lines of Our Song, or Song for Our Bone. I will now be adding Under Heaven to that list. I actually think this would be a really good place to start. Oh man, this was really good. This was really, really good. One of the most unique starts to a book I've read. Really compelling middle. Oh, the scheming and the dialogue. Like, I said this in my Goodreads reviews, but when people are having, like, adversarial like conversations where they're not talking to, like, friends, they're having conversations. Think of, this is mild, it's not a spoiler. I can describe this in a non-spoilery way. And it would have been for Game of Thrones, not for Under Heaven, like the TV show. Varys and Littlefinger talk at one point in the TV show. I know, shocking. And they're kind of almost trying to, like, out-clever, like, they're trying to maneuver each other, and they know they're trying to maneuver each other. So it's almost like they're scoring points against each other, and it almost feels like they're, like, testing each other out and, like, having almost like a combative match. And conversations like that are what Guy Gavriel Kay does so well. Like, the level of tension in some of these conversations is, I'm, like, hanging on every word. It's like, and it's like, there's literally a scene that felt like it was an ambush. You know, 2 people were kind of unawares, they're marching down. 2 people showed up and they started having a conversation, and they were like, two of the people were working together and, like, moving offensively and trying to trap these people, and they were just, like, scrambling to not mess up and to survive and going defensively. Like, it's not like this is told to, this is just the feel that they have, and it's so good. This is more focused on one family. This isn't as POV hoppy as some of his other stuff. Much more focused on the individual story of the Shen family, especially Shen Tai, who starts off this book. The way this book starts is Shen Tai is in mourning because his father died, so he's in mourning for 2 years, and he's spending that 2 years trying to bury 100,000 bodies, because there's just bodies piled up where there was a battle with another nation decades ago where like there were 100,000 casualties, and like it wasn't a one-way slaughter. It was like 40,000 casualties for one side and 60,000 casualties for another side. It was like a huge battle, and no one buried all the bodies because there was 100,000 of them. And he spends this time, his 2 years, just burying the dead. And at night, the ghosts of all the unburied bodies come out, and they scream in agony and in sorrow and in anger, in rage. And yeah, that's how it starts, which I've never read a book like that. And then he receives a gift, and this sets off a political fantasy that it's so good. And I actually, at first I gave it 9.3, but I slept on it. I gave it 9.3 pretty late at night, and I slept on it. I've upped it to 9.4 out of 10. Really one of the Guy Gavriel K books that I feel like there's the least to attack about it. Where there are some guys who, obviously, I love almost all of them, but I think you could be like, oh, Tigana has these chapters that are maybe overly long, or it does this, and Arbonne, people get knocked out and are fine, and, the antagonist is maybe a bit much. But this, I barely have anything to criticize about it. It was fantastic. It didn't quite hit the highs of, like, what I would consider the S-tier books, but it's so close. It was outstanding, and it is probably my 4th favorite Guy Gavriel K book, behind Lord of Emperors, which is won by quite a lot, The Lions of Oursong, and Tigana. And that is it for the reading month. I've started the 1,000 Names. I'm trying to catch up to Alan's read-along on the channel. Yeah, this was a really long wrap-up because it's all a bunch of mini reviews. But whatever. I have 1,000 subscribers, and I'm doing a lot of long videos, so if you weren't okay with long videos, you wouldn't be here. So, I don't know, I think 9 reviews is a pretty, 9 reviews in 38 minutes is not too bad. I guess you guys' video will be slightly longer because there was an intro, but also I might have edited things out and cut things out. We'll see. Probably around 40 minutes. Whatever, it was 9 reviews. I guess kind of 10. I talked about Hunger of the Gods for quite a bit, but really enjoyed the month of standalones. Looking forward to doing, I think I'm going to do 2 standalone videos. I was just like, why not both? Top 10 favorite standalones, and I might just tier rank. Depends how many are left after my top 10. If there's a lot left, I might just do a tier list of every sci-fi fantasy standalone I have ever read, and some of them on this video are going to be on there. And I'm going to be somewhat liberal with my definition of standalone. So yes, Small Gods is part of Discworld, but it's also a standalone. And also, Bastard of Cold, The Heroes, and Red Country are also standalones. Deal with it. Bye, everyone.